Hi, the context for my talk today is a fairly recent speech given by Senator Schumer. And in his speech, he made it very clear that he believed that Prime Minister Netanyahu had lost his way in carrying out the war in Gaza. They had no clear plan of what to do if they ever defeated and eliminated Hamas, and that the Israeli electorate should replace Netanyahu. Now, there's been a great deal of controversy about that and whether or not it really was over the top. But I'd like to illustrate that when you look at other examples of American elected officials with Israel, I would say no. The best, I'm going to give you an example of President Eisenhower. Eisenhower was no anti Semite, and he had been deeply affected by seeing the Nazi concentration camps and was wise enough to have them photographed, videoed, so that no one could ever say that this mass murder didn't take place. That was a wise decision. Now, Eisenhower, as he became president, portrayed a public image of a leisurely, golf playing, amiable, moderate, that didn't take too much interest in policymaking. Well, we know now that that was far from the truth. He was a very shrewd behind the scenes operator. I'm referring here to an article that was written in March 30th, 2009, the History News Network, uh, about Ike and Israel. You can look it up. I think it's pretty comprehensive. It's good. But uh, what we need to focus on in that article and on what we know about Eisenhower and Israel is what he and his administration did in 1956. Nasser, the dictator of Egypt, had been training Fedayeen, it's really terrorists, to attack Israel almost incessantly. And I remember watching a documentary where they seemed to prefer to attack Israeli school buses. That's pretty wretched and awful, indefensible action on their part and his. So Israel was pretty sick and tired of that taking place. In 1956, Britain and France invited them to cooperate in attacking Egypt. Now, England and France had what they thought were good reasons to intervene, and that was that Nasser had nationalized the Suez Canal, taking it away from their control, and they wanted to restore their control. Israel was pleased to be asked because this would give them an opportunity to attack and remove the bases from which these terrorists acted. During the 56 war, the Israelis attacked in the Sinai in a decisive military campaign and were able to take it all. Now, the Eisenhower administration acted as if Israel had no legitimacy in doing this. And as a result, threatened Israel with severe sanctions if they did not withdraw. Ben Gurion, of course, was pretty hesitant to do that. But still, that enough wasn't enough, so the ante was upped. The United States threatened to have the United Nations intervene. Well, part of the background here was that the Soviets didn't like their quasi ally Egypt being attacked and threatened to intervene. So the United States I suppose, was reacting in part to that. But they conflated what Israel did with what the British and French did, which was a mistake. Later, some years later, Eisenhower himself admitted to that and wished they had not done what they did. Still, their pressure forced Israel to retreat from the Sinai. And as Egypt regained it and retained their control over Gaza, attacks continued. The United States promised Israel under Eisenhower administration that if Egypt ever carried out active war, like a blockade of the Straits of Tiran, which is the gateway to Eilat, their southern port, that the United States Navy would intervene to shut down that blockade. That was the promise that was made. Ultimately, that promise was not kept in 1967 when Egypt did carry out a blockade of Strait of Tiran. And President Lyndon Johnson, did not keep the American promise, probably because of our involvement in Vietnam. But so Israel had no option but to attack Egypt in the 1967 war. But our point here is, if you compare what the Eisenhower administration did with what Schumer did, I don't think there's a comparison. You can certainly argue about the advisability of what Schumer did, but he had no authority to impose sanctions. He didn't threaten sanctions. He was a direct appeal to the Israeli electorate to replace Netanyahu. Netanyahu, of course, was pretty ticked off at this. Quite a few others have been too, but that doesn't compare with what the Eisenhower administration did to deprive Israel of its taking of the Sinai. They had good reason to do that. And so when you compare what Schumer said with what Eisenhower administration did, I think it's clear that Eisenhower did far more than Schumer ever dreamed of doing. So thank you for this, and I hope this was helpful to you. Okay, it was 7 minutes.